In case you haven't heard, the doors are open now to the Profitable Podcaster Mastermind. If you want to make sure that you're building an effective sales asset in your business with your podcast, if you want to turn it into the marketing and sales asset you always hoped it could be, this program is a great place to do it. We'll spend 3 months together, you, me, and some other kick-ass podcasters who are using their show to generate, educate, and convert right fit clients, to work through auditing our show effectively, building repeatable sales assets, and of course, what it looks like to come in quarterly and build our strategic plan so that we are creating the content that we need to convert. That's right. Make sure you join us. uncommonlymore.com/mastermind has all the details. For most of the podcasters that I meet, it's not that they don't understand that strategic content would be more effective in turning their podcast into like a real sales asset, a real part of their sales process. It's that they're so overwhelmed with the production process, with the having to figure out what to say, that they're thinking about their podcast in a silo instead of connected with their business goals and their sales goals. And that's what I want to shift in the conversation we have today. And that's the work we do inside of the More Profitable Podcaster Mastermind. Let's get into it. Welcome to the More Profitable Podcast with Stacey Harris. I'm Stacey, and this is the spot to learn more about the strategies, tactics, and tools you need to build your more profitable podcast. My team and I work every day with podcasters like you to shift shows from frustrating time sucks to productive members of your sales team, because your show should be built to generate and convert leads. So let's get into it. I'm stoked to bring you this conversation today because if you've been listening to the show for a while, you may have heard me sit down with Julia or Molly or Elizabeth or Nicole to talk about their time in the Profitable Podcaster Mastermind. But we didn't, in any of those conversations, talk a lot about what happens in the container and why those elements are helpful. And that's what we're going to do today, because this program is unlike any other program. This program is not built to be something that collects dust in your Google Drive or yet another Teachable login that you never, ever actually use. It is called a mastermind because that's what it is. It will be about coming together and building the sales team member that your podcast should be. Building the sales asset you dreamed your show would be when you launched it. That takes intention. That takes time. That takes a different perspective. And that perspective is what we're going to talk through today and what we build into businesses inside the Profitable Podcaster Mastermind. When I launched this program in 2023, I'll be honest, I built it in a very testing forward way. I wasn't sure what this program would be, what it would evolve to, how it would be impactful, and we've run it several times now, and it's one of the favorite things I do in the business because I get to get into the work. I get to get into these shows with these clients, with these participants, and make real change and see the light bulb, and I get to teach again. And that's super, super, super fun. But what I love most about this is the change that happens while we're still in the container. And that happens because we're doing the work as we go. And so I want to run through sort of what we cover and talk about why it's valuable. Because even if you don't decide to join us in the program now or at some point in the future, these are the things I want you to be thinking about with your own show. This is the way I want you to be approaching your own show. And B, because I want you to come in ready to do the work. Because here's what our structure is. This isn't you get a video that I recorded 5 years ago and has never changed, where I talk at you for 30 minutes and then tell you to go do some stuff in a workbook. I mean, there is a workbook, but there's not a video. So what we'll do is each month consists of 2 90-minute calls. Our first call is our workshop call. This is where I'm doing the most sort of talking at you, but it's interactive. You can ask questions, you can get clarification. It is us working through the workbook and working through sort of delivering the information you need in community together. Our second call, which will happen 2 weeks later, that way you have some time to sit with, reflect, and start working through that workbook, allows you to come in and do some of that work together. So we're going to spend that second 90-minute call of each month doing that work together, talking through what we learned. So in our first month, let's talk about this in sort of context, yeah? In our first month, we really focus on looking at what is. We learn the understanding and the importance of comparing our show to our show. We look at ways to look at the data. We talk about sort of best practices in collecting your data and why it's valuable. And we start to look at each element of your show and make sure it's set up to be the member of your sales team you want it to be. Because starting to put out sales asset episodes alone, not going to do a whole lot for you. It's certainly going to be more valuable than not putting out content that is really sales focused. Absolutely. But for the long-term discoverability of our show, for the effectiveness of those sales assets to really be at their best, we want to make sure that the foundations are set up right. So it's things like a lot of the stuff, honestly, that we do in the podcast housekeeping series, where we're talking through intros, outros, cover art, show notes structure. We're talking through the descriptions and best practices in titling, and we're looking at our data and we're seeing what we can learn from that information so that we can be using it to make our show better. So in the first call of our first month together, I will teach you all of that. We'll go through that. We'll talk about the best practices. You can ask questions for clarity. And then in that 2 weeks, I'm going to want you to start going through your show. That way, when we come back together for our second call, we can start making some decisions. So if there's something, most often these questions usually relay around data. So is this change normal, or why might I be expecting this? I really love when people come to this call because they often had a realization that their show was doing a lot better than they thought it was doing. This came up in our case study that we did with Elizabeth Sherman, where she got a lot of good news with her data because she thought her show had totally flatlined and was just no one was listening. Turns out people were. Her show had been growing exponentially and continued to grow. And that's the power of comparing your show to your show instead of your show to, frankly, what you imagine other shows are doing, which is an episode for another day. In fact, I will link in the show notes a really good episode around your download numbers. So check out the show notes for that. But I want us to spend time really working through those decisions. Cool. If you, as you did your audit and as you reviewed your description, you saw some discrepancies, bring that to the call and let's talk through ways we can improve your description. So we can be tying it to what you're selling now instead of what you were selling when you launched the podcast, maybe. Yes, this is a real thing that has come up on calls. In our second month, we then start to shift into content because once we have an understanding of what is, we can start building those sales assets. But before we build our quarterly plan, I want us to think about specifically building one set of assets. And so for that, we talk about building your repeatable series. If you want an example of what a repeatable series is, our repeatable series is the podcast housekeeping series that we run every August. You may have heard it. I will link it in the show notes if you haven't. But these repeatable series are such a valuable asset. And again, our first call of the month, we'll sit down and we'll talk about how you can use these, where you can use these, why these might be helpful. We'll talk about how impactful they can be for building in rest in a time where you know you're going to need it. We can talk about how you can use it as sort of the starting domino drop for a launch and be building a repeatable series that is sort of your pre-launch and launch content, which is a huge, huge value because think about all of the other sales activities that show up when you're in a period of launching. When you're sharing a new offer or a recurring offer, you might need some time to be having sales conversations, to be showing up on other people's podcasts for visibility, etc. Whatever it is, your attention might be needed elsewhere. So let's build an asset that you can use launch after launch after launch. This is where we build a repeatable series. Then that second call of the month, we come in and we do it again where we're talking through your repeatable series. Not just this repeatable series in theory, but the repeatable series you're going to build and why that timing works best for you. The thing I love most about this particular co-working call is the inspiration and clarity for your own gets a whole lot easier when you're hearing other people talk about all of the things they're considering as they find their own path and repeatable series and where it fits and why it fits. And so as the conversation goes on, inspiration builds on inspiration, builds on inspiration, and everybody walks away knowing exactly what they're going to sit down and record and exactly where they're going to release it. We actually talked about this a lot with Molly Watts of Alcohol Minimalist in her episode. So if you want to know more about this concept or how she used it, that's a great place to get into that. From there, we move into our third month. And for me, this is my favorite time. It's the thing I like most to do. Honestly, this is where I essentially teach you how to do the thing we do with our production clients every quarter. We sit down and we build the next 12 months. The reason I like to do this after the repeatable series is oftentimes for our clients in this program, that repeatable series will very likely be a chunk of that 12-week content plan. Not always. Some people have repeatable series that's going to run after that sort of 12-week content or that 12-week span that we're planning for has passed. Cool. But oftentimes that repeatable series sort of becomes a first block, a foundational block in building out what will be that 12 weeks. And if you're somebody who hasn't focused a lot on sales previously in your episodes, it can feel like a more comfortable way in to be building something that's sort of structured as a sales asset and then feed around it more of what you've been doing in your episodes so that you can start integrating some of that messaging into all of those episodes. So it can be kind of a stepping stone to have that in there. But what we do is we spend that third month really just building your 12-week content plan. This is the 1 month that's a little bit different because I teach this to you by building them with you. So over the course of those 2 calls, we will have time for each person to sit down and talk with me one-on-one in front of the group. So you're able to get my feedback, but also feedback from the group. I always love when somebody pipes in and is like, I'd love to hear this, or this would be really helpful, or, I tried this and this worked really well, or whatever, and sort of co-create that content plan. But what I like about this is because we're doing it together, you're building the skill and you're building the confidence to continue to do this. You're building the neural pathways. You're building the muscle memory that is required to be thinking about your show sales first, to be thinking about your episodes as not little content bites, but as sales and marketing assets, as a part of the sales machine. As bit by bit goes together, you build the member of your sales team you hoped your podcast could be someday. That's what comes together when we do that work in that third month. And we do it together so that you know how to do it. You don't just know I did it for you, but you know how to do it. And again, I really am always so excited to see by that point, the groups really come together. They have a real good feel for everybody's shows and what we're doing because we keep this group intentionally small. This is not a program with 30 or 50 or 100 or 1,500 people in it. This is maxed out at 10. We never have more than 10 people in this program because I want to be able to give each and every person on each and every call my attention. I want to be able to hold in my head what your shows are and what we're trying to do with them and where we need to move clients through. And so this group gets close. This group ends up supporting each other. I especially love, and if you listen in to Molly or Elizabeth's episode, you will hear them talk about their experience. Their group came in special as a handful of people from a mastermind program. We did a special version of the program just for them. Honestly, it was the same program, but it was just for that group. It was really cool to see people come through it that had that deeper relationship. So if you are somebody who's got a business bestie or a mastermind partner who also has a podcast and is also looking to be doing this, invite them, bring a friend, do it as a buddy. It can be a really, really cool thing. And if you don't, You will likely meet someone like that in this program because it is about us spending this time together. There is a reason I call this a mastermind and not a course. It is structured to be live. There's no videos, there's no content library you're going to get. Everything is in a Google Drive folder, and everything is the workbooks for your calls, from your calls, and the recordings of your calls. We do offer recordings of all the calls, partially because it's helpful for me to rewatch calls or sometimes I'll get transcripts from calls I'm a part of and take that information in again another time. It could be my ADHD. I don't know. I'm not going to say, but I like having the reference. And so we always offer those call recordings also. Sometimes you can't make it. Sometimes you can't make it to the whole call. That's cool. You're going to have a recording and that's yours forever. You'll be able to download it from the drive and run with it. But you're not going to go into Teachable or any other sort of learning platform. It's a Google Drive folder with the assets from our program in it, because this is about this container being for the people who are in this container right now. And I'm hoping that that'll be you, because this week we open the doors for our next round of the Profitable Podcaster Mastermind, and I really would love to see you join us. I'd really love to see us shift your show from the endless sort of to-do list that falls to the bottom every week until the very last minute when you need to get an episode out because you said you were going to get an episode out. And what's most important is that you're consistent, right? To confidently releasing episodes that you know drive sales, that you know move people into a decision. I want you to shift from building a nurture machine that keeps people listening, hopefully, and instead be building a sales machine that moves people through a process of understanding what's next and into deciding that it's the right time for them so that they book calls, so they show up on sales calls and parrot things you've said at the podcast to you. That is so fun. The best part of this is my sales calls are so much shorter now. When I shifted to using my show the way we use our show, and I hear this from clients all of the time, it reduced how long I needed to be on sales calls. Once upon a time, my sales calls were an hour long. I calendar now 30 minutes. I'm off most sales calls 20 minutes in because my prospects come to the call knowing they're ready, knowing that this is the right fit for them, understanding what's going to be required of them. And it's just a gut check. It's a check-in to make sure that I'm still the same person on the call that I am here, which, spoiler alert, I am. And it's to make sure that they didn't misunderstand anything, that everything that they've taken in is really what's there, and so that they can get their process starting. And we roll. It has shortened my sales cycle so significantly. And that's the thing I'm most grateful for, because that's time that I can be in delivery. That's time that I can be working with those clients that I love so much. Instead of having to go and get the right, I hope they fit client, I get to spend time working with, I know they fit clients. And that's what I want for you. And that's what we're building when we talk about the Profitable Podcaster Mastermind. So join us over at uncommonlymore.com/mastermind. You can get all of your questions answered there. If you have any additional questions, reach out. Those questions will come directly to me and I will answer them. I would love to chat with you. I cannot wait to see you in this program. And I thank you so much for making sure that your show is not just another show, but is an actual asset that helps move your listener into client. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Remember that content consumption does not make changes. So commit to doing something from today's episode. Maybe it's taking action on what we talked about. Maybe it's reaching out to me and learning more about podcast strategy intensives or what podcast production looks like with our team. All of that is over at uncommonlymore.com. And if you haven't yet signed up for the podcast newsroom, I want to remind you that is a great next step. If you're not really sure what comes next, hang out over there. get those exclusive private episodes. That's over at podcastnewsroom.com. And the last favor I will ask, because social proof is endlessly important for sure, is to leave a rating or review for the show. If you go to ratethispodcast.com/more, that's the easiest way to do it. But I would love to hear what you thought of the show, what you think of the show, and if the show has been helpful for you. I can't wait to chat with you. So this is just the start of the conversation. Reach out so we can keep it going. Talk soon.